million for small-scale irrigation value chain, irrigation and value addition project, Kenya shillings 642.5 million for the food security and crop diversification project. Mr. Speaker, to improve livestock production, I propose Kenya shillings 2.4 billion for de-risking, inclusive and value enhancement of pastoral economies program, Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for livestock value chain support project, Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for Kenya livestock commercialization program, Kenya shillings 192.5 million for the embryo transfer project. I have also proposed Kenya shillings 300 million for the development leather industrial park, Kenani. Mr. Speaker, to support the growth of the brew economy, I propose a total of Kenya shillings 11.3 billion to the brew economy and fisheries subsector. This includes 3.7 billion to aquaculture business development project, Kenya shillings 3.1 billion to the Kenya Marine Fisheries and Socio-Economic Development Project, Kenya shillings 540 million for rehabilitation of fish riding sites, Kenya shillings 695.5 million for Riwatoni ultra-modern fish hub, and Kenya shillings 600 million for marine fish assessment. Mr. Speaker, to raise agricultural productivity and enhance resilience to climate change risks in targeted smallholder farming and even pastoral communities, I propose an allocation of 340 million shillings towards adding drought and emergencies project. Mr. Speaker, to ensure legitimacy of land ownership and settle the land race, I propose a sum of 5.5 billion. This allocation will cater for the processing and registration of the title deeds, settlement of the land race, digitization of the land registry, georeferencing of land parcels, and construction of land registries. Second, I want to turn to transforming micro, small, and medium enterprises economy. Mr. Speaker, accessibility and affordable credit to most Kenyans at the bottom of the pyramid remains a challenge. To address this challenge, the government is proposing an additional allocation of 5 billion shillings to the Financial Inclusion or Hustlers Fund to scale up access to credit for households and MSMEs. I also propose an additional 200 million for the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, Kenya shillings 162.5 million for the Center for Entrepreneurship Project, and Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for rural Kenya Financial Inclusion Facility. Third, let me turn to housing and settlement, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government's commitment to turn the housing challenge into an economic opportunity to create quality jobs for the youth directly in the construction sector and indirectly through the production of building products. This will be achieved through, among other measures, facilitating a delivery of 200,000 houses per annum and enabling low-cost housing mortgages. To continue supporting this initiative, I have proposed an allocation of 92.1 billion shillings for the housing, urban development, and public works. This includes Kenya shillings 8.3 billion under the Kenya Urban Program, Kenya shillings 3 billion to Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company for enhancement of the company's capital as well as for lending to the primary mortgage lenders, Kenya shillings 32.5 billion for construction of affordable housing units, Kenya shillings 15 billion for the construction of social housing unit, Kenya shillings 14.7 billion for social and physical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocation to the housing, urban development, and public works include 11.3 billion for the Kenya Informal Settlement Improvement Project Phase 3, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the construction of markets, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the National Slum Upgrading Program, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the construction of housing units for the National Police and Kenya prisons, Kenya shillings 496.3 million for the construction of food bridges, Kenya shillings 444 million targeted to support construction of county headquarters that are targeted. Fourth, universal healthcare coverage. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed and determined to realize the constitutional right to health by promoting access to quality and affordable healthcare through universal healthcare coverage program. Towards this end, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of 127 billion to the health sector to support various activities and programs. These include 4.2 billion for Kenya shillings 4.2 billion for universal health care coverage, coordination and management unit, Kenya shillings 2 billion for free maternity health care, Kenya shillings 3.6 billion for managed equipment services, Kenya shillings 861.5 million to provide medical cover for the orphans, elderly, and severely disabled persons in our society, Kenya shillings 4.6 billion to cater for the stipend and the acquisition of specialized medical equipment for the community health promoters, and 4.1 billion shillings for primary health care fund. Mr. Speaker, throughout the cases of HIV, AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis, and enhance the vaccines and immunization program in the country, I have proposed Kenya shillings 28.7 billion for the Global Fund, and Kenya shillings 4.6 billion for vaccines and immunization programs, respectively. Mr. Speaker, to enhance the early diagnosis and management of cancer and reduce the burden of treatment among Kenyans, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 1.1 billion to strengthen cancer management in Kenyatta National Hospital and Kisii Level 5 hospitals. I have also proposed Kenya shillings 2 billion to the Emergencies, Chronic and Critical Illness Fund. Mr. Speaker, to improve health delivery services, health service delivery, I have proposed a sum of Kenya shillings 29.7 billion for Kenyatta National Hospital and Moi Teaching and Referral Hospitals. This includes 2.6 billion for the construction of Kenyatta National Hospital Burns and Pediatric Center. I've also proposed Kenya shillings 5.2 billion for the Kenya Medical Supplies Agency, Kenya shillings 2.5 billion for the Kenya Medical Research Institute, Kenya shillings 1 billion for procurement of family planning and reproductive health commodities, and Kenya shillings 760 million for procurement of equipment at the National Blood Transfusion Services. Further, to strengthen the capacity of medical personnel, I have proposed Kenya shillings 3.7 billion for medical interns, Kenya shillings 406 million for training of health personnel, and Kenya shillings 8.6 billion for Kenya Medical Training Center. Finally, the digital superhighway and creative economy. Mr. Speaker, investment in digital superhighway and creative economy continues to play a critical role in enabling the government achieve the objectives of bottom-up economic transformation agenda through increased productivity and competitiveness. On the creative economy promotion of music, theater, and graphic design, digital animation, fashion, and craft, among others, continues to create jobs opportunities for the youth. Mr. Speaker, to support the growing digital superhighway and creative economy, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 16.3 billion to fund the initiatives in the information, communication, and technology sector. Specifically, this proposed allocation includes 1.1 billion for government shared services, 704 million for digital superhighway, 2.3 billion for the construction of Kenya Advanced Institute of Science and Technology at Concert Technopolis, 2.8 billion for Kenya Digital Economy Acceleration Project, and 2.8 billion for maintenance and rehabilitation of the last mile county connectivity network. In order to fast track the developments of the Concert Technopolis city, I have proposed an allocation of 1.5 billion for the horizontal infrastructure phase 1 and Kenya shillings 5.2 billion for the Concert data center and smart city facilities. Other key allocations to critical sectors supporting better include investment in critical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to expand and maintain critical infrastructure in roads, railways, sea, and airports to achieve socio-economic transformation that will also enhance Kenya's competitiveness and facilitate cross-border trade and regional integration. Towards this end, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 193.4 billion for development of roads. This includes 86.2 billion to support construction of roads and bridges, Kenya shillings 37.7 billion for the rehabilitation of roads, and Kenya shillings 69.5 billion for road maintenance. Mr. Speaker, to expand the railway transport and even associated infrastructure, I have proposed Kenya shillings 25.2 billion. I've also proposed Kenya shillings 2.4 billion for infrastructure development at Dogokudu Special Economic Zone, Kenya shillings 1 billion for Nairobi Bus Rapid Transport Project, Kenya shillings 316 million for promotion of e-mobility project, and Kenya shillings 239.4 billion for the development of Nairobi Railway City. To facilitate movement of goods and people in our inland waters, I have proposed an additional Kenya shillings 200 million for acquisition of ferries for Lake Victoria. Mr. Speaker, to scale up production of reliable and affordable energy, I have proposed an allocation of 69.7 billion to the energy subsector. This includes Kenya shillings 27.8 billion for the national grid system, Kenya shillings 24 billion for rural electrification, Kenya shillings 14 billion for the development of geothermal energy, Kenya shillings 2.2 billion for the alternative energy technologies, and Kenya shillings 920 million for the development of nuclear energy. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to improving education outcomes. The government continues to invest in education to improve education outcomes and create a level playing field for all Kenyan children. Mr. Speaker, from this end, I have proposed a total allocation of 656.6 billion, or 27.6% of total expenditures to the education sector. This includes Kenya shillings 358.2 billion to the Teacher Service Commission, Kenya shillings 142.3 billion for basic education, Kenya shillings 128 billion for higher education and research, Kenya shillings 30.7 billion for technical vocational education and training. Mr. Speaker, the allocation of the education sector includes Kenya shillings 9.1 billion free primary education, 61.9 billion shillings for free day secondary education, Kenya shillings 30.7 billion for junior secondary school capitation, and Kenya shillings 5 billion for the examinations fee waiver. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 13.4 billion for the conversion of 46,000 junior secondary school interns to permanent and pensionable terms. Kenya shillings 1.3 billion for the training of teachers on competency-based curriculum, and Kenya shillings 360 million for the digital literacy program and ICT integration in our secondary schools. Mr. Speaker, to support infrastructure and infrastructure development and ensure safe learning in our schools, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 3.2 billion for primary and secondary schools infrastructure, Kenya shillings 1 billion for construction of classroom for junior secondary schools, and Kenya shillings 2.3 billion for the construction and equipping of technical training institutes and vocational training centers. Further, I have proposed Kenya shillings 11.1 billion for the Kenya Primary Education Equity in Learning Program, Kenya shilling 1.8 billion for construction of integrated resource centers, and Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for the Kenya Secondary Education Quality Improvement Project. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations to the education sector include Kenya shillings 1.1 billion for the research, science, and technology innovation. Mr. Speaker, the government is implementing the new funding model for public universities and TVET institutions through the provision of government scholarships and loans apportioned according to students' need. The new funding framework seeks to offer students whose households are at the bottom of the pyramid equal opportunity in accessing university education, as well as technical training. Towards this end, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 35.9 billion to the Higher Education Loans Boards for provision of loans to university and TVET students, Kenya shillings 16.9 billion for the scholarship for university students, and Kenya shillings 7.7 billion capitation and scholarship for TVET students. Let me move now to supporting manufacturing for job creation. Mr. Speaker, further to promote local industries, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 23.7 billion under various implementing ministries, departments, and agencies. Out of these, 4.5 billion will support establishment of county integrated agro-industrial parks, Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for supporting access to finance and enterprise recovery SAFA project, Kenya shillings 1.1 billion for construction of investor sheds in Athi River, Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for establishment of 6 flagship export processing zones hubs, Kenya shillings 440 million to the development of special economic zones textile park in Naivasha, and Kenya shillings 1 billion for the Kenya Jobs Economic Transformation KJET. In addition, Mr. Speaker, in order to revitalize and maximize benefits from our cash crops, the government will make further investments towards revival and enhancement of output. In this respect, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed Kenya shillings 2 billion for Coffee Cherry Revolving Fund. This is in addition to Kenya shillings 4 billion allocated in the current fiscal year. Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for payments of debts owed to sugarcane farmers, arrears to employees and maintenance of cane testing units, Kenya shillings 120 million for cotton industry revitalization project, and Kenya shillings 150 million for the pyrethrum industry recovery. Mr. Speaker, in order to reduce over-reliance of the importation of edible oils and encourage local production and processing, I have proposed Kenya shillings 90 million for the coconut industry revitalization project, Kenya shillings 260 million for the National Edible Oils Crop Promotion Project, and an allocation to National Agricultural Value Chain Development Project, which includes support for cashew nut development. Mr. Speaker, to enhance milk processing, I have proposed Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for excess milk mop-up, Kenya shilling 500 million for modernization of KCC milk factories, and Kenya shillings 250 million for the construction of a milk factory in Narok. Mr. Speaker, to equip our youth with essential training and internship opportunities, I have proposed an allocation of 1.3 billion for the Kenya Industry and Entrepreneurship Project, Kenya shillings 119.9 million for the construction of industrial research laboratories, and Kenya shillings 114.3 million for the constituency industrial development centers. I will now turn into improving security, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, enhanced national security creates an enabling environment for businesses to thrive while aiding faster economic recovery. It is in this regard, I have proposed an allocation of 377.5 billion to support the operations of the National Police Service, Defense, and National Intelligence Service and Prison Services. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocations include Kenya shillings 173.1 billion for defense, 110.6 billion for National Police Service, 46.3 billion for the National Intelligence Service, and Kenya shillings 32.7 billion for prison services. I have proposed an allocation of 13.9 billion to cater for leasing police motor vehicles and the modernization program. Mr. Speaker, to step up the war on crime and embrace support to administration of justice, I have proposed Kenya shillings 918.4 million to equip the National Forensic Laboratory. Protecting the vulnerable groups, Mr. Speaker, as a caring government, we shall continue to protect the vulnerable members of our society. I have in this regard proposed an allocation of 31.3 billion for social protection and affirmative actions in this budget. Mr. Speaker, out of this allocation, Kenya shillings 18.6 billion will cater for cash transfers to elderly persons, 7.9 billion for orphans and vulnerable children, Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for persons living with severe disabilities. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocation includes 1.5 billion for the Kenya Hunger Safety Net Program, Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for the Kenya Social and Economic Inclusion Project. In addition, 815 million will go to Child Welfare Society of Kenya, 400 million to the Presidential Bursary for the orphans, Kenya shillings 600.1 million for National Council for Persons Living with Disabilities, and Kenya shillings 100 million for the National Albinism Support Program, and Kenya shillings 100 for National Autism Support Program. Let me turn to equity, poverty reduction, women and youth empowerment. Mr. Speaker, the most pressing challenge in our country at the moment is lack of job opportunities for the youth. This has been exacerbated by the multiple shocks that have hit our economy. And in order to empower the youth and support businesses owned by the youth and women, I have proposed Kenya shillings 89.5 billion for these initiatives. This allocation includes 10.4 billion for the National Youth Service, 1.1 billion for the Kenya Youth Empowerment Program, 200 million for the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, 162.5 billion for the Center for Entrepreneurship, 230 million for the establishment of youth empowerment centers, 2.7 million to National Youth Opportunity Towards Advancement, NYOTA. In addition, I have proposed Kenya shillings 649.8 million to strengthen the film industry in Kenya. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to ensuring increased income for our women through employment creation and supporting women-led enterprises. And to further empower our women, I have proposed Kenya shillings 182.8 million for the Women Enterprise Fund, Kenya shillings 3.5 billion for the National Government Affirmative Action Fund. Mr. Speaker, to promote regional equity, reduce poverty, and enhance social development, I have proposed Kenya shillings 63 billion for the National Government Constituency Development Fund, as well as Kenya shillings 8 billion for the Equalization Fund to finance programs identified in marginal areas. Let me turn now to stimulating tourism, growth, sports, culture, and recreation and arts. Mr. Speaker, the government has prioritized expanding the space for creativity, including freedom of expression and protection of intellectual property rights. The government will also strengthen mainstreaming of arts and culture, infrastructure and support cultural production, and as well as creative economy. We are also cognizant of the brand value of Kenyans participating and excelling in international sports arena as incalculable. To support tourism, sports, culture, and even recreation, I have proposed an allocation of 23.7 billion, and this includes an allocation of 16.5 billion for the Sports, Arts, Social Development Fund, Kenya shillings 4.9 billion for the Tourism Fund, and Kenya shillings 2.2 billion for the Tourism Promotion Fund. Let me turn to environment protection, water and natural resources. Mr. Speaker, in order to support environment and water conservation and respond to climate change, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 10.7 billion for forest resources conservation and management, 1.7 billion for forest research and development, 2.7 billion for environment management and protection, 5.9 billion for the Kenya Financing Locally Led Climate Action Project, 1.6 billion for meteorological services, and Kenya shillings 13.1 billion for wildlife security, conservation, and management. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed Kenya shillings 1 billion for wildlife research and development, Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for human-wildlife conflict compensation, and Kenya shillings 800 million for wildlife insurance. Mr. Speaker, to expand and access clean and adequate water for domestic and agricultural use, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 36.6 billion for the water and sewerage infrastructure development, 12.5 billion for water resources management, and Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for water storage and flood control. In addition, I have proposed 17.8 billion for irrigation and land reclamation, Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for water harvesting and storage for irrigation. I now turn to improving governance and sustaining the fight against corruption. To enhance good governance and Mr. Speaker, and scale up fight against corruption, I have proposed Kenya shillings 4.2 billion for the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, 4 billion for the Office of Director of Public Prosecution, 6.9 billion for the State Law Office, 8.7 billion for the Office of the Auditor General. In addition, Mr. Speaker, to enhance the oversight and registration of the role of Parliament, I propose an allocation of Kenya shillings 44.6 billion for Parliament. To enable administration and justice, I propose an allocation of 24.7 billion for the judiciary. This includes 900 million for construction and refurbishment of courts and 800 million for the automation of the judiciary. Allocations to the county governments, Mr. Speaker, I turn to this. the county governments will receive a proposed allocation of 400.1 billion as equitable share in the financial year 2024-2025. It's for the first time that they have arrived to this figure of 400 and surpassed it in the last 12 years of devolution. As equitable share of financial year 2024-2025, and this is equivalent to 25.48% of the actual revenue raised nationally for the financial year 2020-2021, which is in compliance with Article 203, subsection 2 of the Constitution of Kenya. In addition to the equitable share of revenue, a further 44.4 billion has been proposed as additional allocation to county governments. This comprises of 8.76 billion for the national government share of revenue, Kenya shillings 35.66 billion from proceeds of external loans and grants for the external loans and grants. Equalization Fund, Mr. Speaker, we have proposed an allocation of 8 billion for the Equalization Fund, which is 0.5% of the actual revenue raised nationally in 2020-2021 reference year. Measures to enhance county government's own source revenue, Mr. Speaker, the National Treasury is implementing a policy to support the enhancement of own source revenue by county governments as we await the enactment of the National Rating Bill. This bill will enable the county governments to correct more property rates, including contribution in lieu of rates. In addition, Mr. Speaker, a multi-agency committee has been formed to manage the rollout of the proposed integrated county revenue management system in 47 county governments. This system will increase transparency, accountability, and efficiency in revenue collection. Let me turn now to taxation measures, Mr. Speaker. The policy measures to support the budget, the tax policy measures supporting the budget for the financial year 2024-2025 budget are very, very critical. In the course of this year, we embarked on tax policy review through a number of tax studies that will support the development of a progressive tax system. Mr. Speaker, the objective of these reforms is to develop an elaborate tax policy that will raise adequate revenue to finance recurrent as well as development budgets. For this to materialize, we intend to first develop diverse methods to enlarge the tax base. Second, we want to make sure that we minimize tax expenditures that amount to Kenya shillings 396 billion, which is equivalent to 2.9% of GDP as of 2022. Of the Kenya shillings 396 billion, 63.1% of it is on VAT refunds alone on zero-rated final consumer goods. Third, we want to create a tax system that is not only predictable to taxpayers, but also yields predictable revenues to government. Fourth, we want to develop a tax system that supports markets, that supports production, consumption, and even investments. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, the year 2024-2025 marks the beginning of these reforms through the proposed amendments in various tax laws contained in the Finance Bill 2024. Mr. Speaker, these reforms are part of a wider tax policy reforms contained in the medium-term revenue strategy, and I will shortly be providing highlights of these reforms. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, during the East African Community pre-budget consultations held in May 2024, the ministers responsible for finance and economic planning in the East African Community region agreed on customs measures that will support and protect industries in the region. Mr. Speaker, the tax measures proposed in the Finance Bill 2024 and the said custom measures are expected to generate an additional Kenya shillings 346.7 billion or 1.9% of GDP to the exchequer for the financial year 2024-2025. Let me start with custom duties. Mr. Speaker, allow me to provide highlights of some of the custom measures agreed during the pre-budget consultation with the East African Community Partner States. Mr. Speaker, the ministers agreed on a number of measures for enhancing the competitiveness of locally manufactured products by allowing stays of application for the East African Community Common External Tariff, not to change the rates, and where necessary, adopt higher rates of duty to encourage local production in East African Community countries. The ministers also agreed on duty remissions for raw materials and inputs used by local manufacturers to facilitate East African Community domestic production. Mr. Speaker, in order to meet local demands and enhance food security in Kenya on key staple foods, Kenya was granted an extension of the current stay of application of to import rice at a duty rate of 35% or $200 per metric ton, whichever is higher, for 1 year, instead of East African Community Common External Tariff rate of 75% or $345 per metric ton, whichever is higher. And also, Kenya was allowed to import wheat at a duty rate of 10% instead of 35% for 1 year under the EAC, East African Community Duty Remission Scheme. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has a strong assembly of electronics industry, including mobile phones. In order to further open up the ICT sector to more investors, Kenya requested for duty remission on inputs for manufacture and assembly of smart telecommunication devices, including mobile phones, laptops, and tablets. This request was granted. Mr. Speaker, the local assembly of automotives continues to facilitate job creation with positive ripple effects in other supportive sectors, especially in the manufacturing of spare parts. In this regard, Kenya continued to develop capacity in the assembly of prime movers, road tractors, trailers, to meet both local and regional demand. In order to safeguard this capacity, Kenya was granted a stay of application of East African Common External Tariff rate of 10% to apply a duty rate of 25% for prime movers and 35% for trailers for 1 year. Further, in order to continue supporting the assembly of motorcycles in the region, East African community ministers in this regard agreed to extend the duty remission on importation of raw materials for the manufacture of parts used in the assembly of motorcycles, including leaf springs and wiring harness. In addition, ministers agreed to extend duty remission for completely knocked down kits for assembly of motorcycles at the rate of 10%. Mr. Speaker, the growth of investment in metal and allied subsector has enhanced the capacity to manufacture various iron and steel products in the region. To safeguard the gains in this subsector, the ministers agreed to retain the duty rate at 35% with the corresponding specific rates for imported iron and steel products for a further 1 year. In order to promote and protect textile and apparel sector, which is one of the 9 bottom-up economic transformation agenda value chains prioritized in this budget, Kenya was allowed to apply a rate of 25% on selected fabric products with corresponding specific duty rates in order to curb undervaluation and under-invoicing of imported products. Further, to ensure competitiveness of textile products that are produced locally in sufficient quantities, Kenya was granted a stay of application and will apply a higher duty of 35%. Mr. Speaker, in order to reduce production costs of animal feeds, Kenya was allowed to extend importation of inputs for manufacturers of animal feeds duty-free under the East African Community Duty Remission Scheme. Mr. Speaker, leather and leather products is one of the value chains under BETA. Kenya has sufficient supply of hides and skins to meet the demand from local manufacturers of leather and leather products. In order to promote this industry and enhance incomes of our pastoral farmers, the ministers agreed to retain a stay of application of duty import on imported leather bags at 35% for Kenya. Mr. Speaker, I have just highlighted a few of the customs measures agreed by East African Community Ministers of Finance. The complete list will be gazetted by the East African Community Secretariat and will become effective starting June 1st July 2024. Let me now turn to the finance bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, allow me to highlight tax policy measures proposed in the Finance Bill 2024. I will begin with the proposed amendments to the Income Tax Act, followed by Value-Added Tax, Excise Duty Act, Tax Procedures Act, and miscellaneous fees and levies. Mr. Speaker, let me start with amendments to the Income Tax Act. Currently, retirement benefits, Mr. Speaker, are subjected to tax. This taxation ceases at the age of 65 years. In order to support the retired employees, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to exempt all retirement benefits paid from the Registered Pension Fund, Registered Provident Fund, Registered Individual Retirement Fund, and National Social Security Fund and the Public Pension Scheme upon attainment of the retirement age. Mr. Speaker, for the individuals who take up early retirement, this exemption will only apply if the individual has contributed to the pension scheme for a period of 20 years from the date of registration as a member. Mr. Speaker, in addition, the annual limit of pension contribution that is exempt from tax is 30% of the individual income, or Kenya shillings 240,000, whichever is lower. Considering that this limit has not been revised since 2005, and to encourage savings for social security after retirement, I propose to increase this limit to 360,000 shillings per annum. Further, Mr. Speaker, I propose to allow deduction contribution to a post-retirement medical fund subject to a limit of Kenya shillings 10,000 per month. This will promote savings for post-retirement healthcare needs. Mr. Speaker, currently the threshold above which withholding tax applies on payments for management fees, professional fees, training fees, and contractual fees is Kenya shillings 24,000 per month. I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to remove this threshold since it creates a room for tax planning and is a challenge to tax administration. Mr. Speaker, despite the Income Tax Act providing a corporate tax rate of 30%, some taxpayers pay tax at an effective rate of less than 15%. This is due to vigorous tax planning and tax incentives provided under the Act. To prevent this practice, I propose to amend Income Tax Act to introduce a minimum top-up tax payable by a multinational group with a consolidated annual turnover of euro 750 million, whose effective corporate tax rate is below 15%. Mr. Speaker, the spectrum of license fees paid by telecommunication operators are currently not tax deductible, creating unfairness in the tax system. In this regard, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to allow telecommunications network operators to deduct the spectrum licenses fees over a period of 10 years. Mr. Speaker, advanced pricing agreements have emerged as a valuable tool for preventing tax disputes related to transfer pricing of cross-border transactions. In this regard, I propose to empower the Commissioner to enter into advanced pricing agreement with taxpayers engaged in transactions with related entities. Mr. Speaker, to attract international financial investors in Kenya and reinforce Kenya's position as a regional financial hub, I propose to reduce the rate of capital gains tax from 15% to 5% for firms certified by the Nairobi International Financial Center Authority. Mr. Speaker, a transfer of property between an individual and an entity where the individual holds 100% shareholding does not constitute a gain. In this respect, I propose to exclude from capital gains tax this kind of transfer. Mr. Speaker, the Digital Services Tax was introduced to prevent tax-based erosion occasioned by migration of traditional businesses from physical shops to online platform that is not feasible by the Commissioner of Tax, by the Commissioner for Tax purposes. It has been noted that the design of the tax does not capture all taxpayers, leading not only to loss of revenue, but also to unfairness in taxation. For this reason, and in line with international best practice, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to replace the digital service tax with the significant economic presence tax. Mr. Speaker, to expand the tax base and make our country self-reliant, I propose to introduce an annual motor vehicle tax at the rate of 2.5%, the value of the vehicle, subject to minimum amount of Kenya shillings 5,000. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to gains. There are substantial gains for Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, currently the tax-free amount on subsistence allowance paid to employees in the private sector for a period spent outside the usual place of work while on official duties is capped at Kenya shillings 2,000 per day. This is quite low considering the inflation that has occurred over the years. To cushion employees in the private sector from high cost of living, I propose to review the threshold to an amount not exceeding 5% of the employee's monthly gross earnings. Second, Mr. Speaker, the affordable housing levy and pay as you earn are calculated from the same base, leading to double taxation. To address this, I propose to make the housing levy deductible expense. This means that there is a tax savings for Kenyans and therefore affording Kenyans more money in their pocket. Mr. Speaker, in order to encourage Kenyans to continue constructing their own houses, I propose to increase the remit of interest payments that qualify for mortgage relief from Kenya shillings 300,000 to Kenya shillings 360,000 per annum. Let me turn now, Mr. Speaker, to amendments to the value-added tax. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight the amendments of the value-added tax. Mr. Speaker, currently the registration of VAT is a requirement for a person who makes taxable supplies of Kenya shillings 5 million or more. This threshold was last reviewed in 2007. In recognition to the effect of inflation over the years, and to enhance efficiency in tax administration, I propose to increase the threshold to Kenya shillings 8 million. Mr. Speaker, the VAT Act allows taxpayers making both taxable and exempt supplies to claim input tax where the proportion of exempt supplies is less than 10%. This has led to tax planning and hence loss of government revenue. To address this, I have proposed the removal of the threshold so that only the input tax relating to taxable supplies are deductible. Mr. Speaker, in support of the government's effort to combat malaria, I propose to remove VAT on mosquito repellents and raw materials used in the manufacture of repellents. This will encourage local production of the repellents. Mr. Speaker, tax expenditure was estimated at 393.6 billion, or about 2.9% of GDP for the year 2022. Of this amount, VAT tax expenditure amounted to 248.3 billion, or what is 63.1% of the total estimate of tax expenditure, which is a large erosion of the VAT tax base. Mr. Speaker, tax expenditure creates avenues for revenue leakage and thus deny government the revenue to support key priorities that benefit majority of Kenyans, of the citizens in Kenya. Recognizing the importance of tax expenditure in the promotion of investment and addressing welfare challenges in the economy, and in line with the medium-term revenue strategy, I propose to rationalize the VAT tax expenditure as provided for in the VAT Act in form of exemptions and zero rating based on the following criteria. First, that goods currently exempt be subjected to VAT. Second, zero-rated finished goods and consumer goods and services be exempt from VAT. Third, zero rating be restricted to goods and taxable services meant for export. Based on the above, Mr. Speaker, based on the above criteria, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed several amendments to the first schedule of the VAT Act in order to move some goods and services from exempt to vatable status, In addition, I have also proposed amendments to the second schedule of the VAT Act so that we can move some of the goods and services from zero rating to either exempt status or VATable. This rationalization is expected to expand the VAT tax base and create fairness in taxation. Let me turn now to amendments in the Excise Duty Act. Mr. Speaker, the tax measures I have proposed under excise duty, I propose to change as follows. I propose to change the due date of payment of excise duty on alcoholic beverages from 24 hours within 5 working days after removal from the stockroom. The 24 hours time frame has posed administrative challenges and cash flow, as well as cash flow challenges to the taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, to protect local assemblies and create fairness and equity in taxation, I propose an introduction of excise duty on imported, fully built motorcycle at the rate of 10% of the customs value, in addition to specific tax duty rate of Kenya shillings 12,952.83 cents per unit, whichever is higher. Mr. Speaker, participation in betting, gaming, prize competition, lotteries continues to affect socio-economic fabric of our society, given their addictive nature. Mr. Speaker, last year we raised the excise duty on these activities from 7.5% to 12.5% to discourage participation. Despite this increase, participation rate in these activities by Kenyan citizens, especially school-going children and young adults, continues to persist. To further discourage this behavior, I propose to increase the excise duty tax rates to 20%. Mr. Speaker, in line with research findings commissioned by the National Treasury on the taxation of alcoholic beverages, I propose to review the excise duty structure on wines and beer from specific rates per litre to the rate of Kenya shillings 22 shillings and 50 cents per centiliter of pure alcohol. In other words, we want to start taxing alcohol beverages on the basis of alcohol content. Further, I propose to change excise duty rate on spirits from specific rates per litre to Kenya shilling 16 per centiliter of pure alcohol. This new structure of taxation based on alcoholic content does not distort the markets, and does not affect the investment decision, and it is expected to encourage responsible consumption behavior of these alcoholic beverages. Mr. Speaker, I also propose to review excise duty structure on cigarettes in line with research conducted and advice that has recommended harmonization of excise duty rates for cigarettes with and without filters at the rate of Kenya shillings 4,100 per mille. This will reduce the incentive for misdeclaration and illicit trade. Mr. Speaker, I propose to increase the excise duty rate from Kenya shillings 1,594.50 cents per kilogram to Kenya shillings 2,000 per kilogram on products containing nicotine or nicotine substitute to address their adverse effects on human health. This excludes those approved medicinal products. Additionally, I propose to increase the excise duty rate on liquid nicotine for electronic cigarettes from Kenya shillings 70 per milliliter to Kenya shillings 100 per milliliter. Mr. Speaker, to provide fair treatment to both residents and non-residents offering excisable services, I propose to amend the Excise Duty Act to charge excisable services offered in Kenya by non-resident through a digital platform. Mr. Speaker, the Finance Act introduced excise duty on fees charged on advertisement of alcoholic beverages, betting, gaming, lotteries, and prize competition on TVs, print media, billboards, and FM stations. This resulted to a shift in choice of advertisement platform from the traditional media to internet and social media. To create a level playing field and to achieve the intended purpose, I propose to expand the scope of this tax to include fees charged on internet and social media advertisements. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance the administrative efficiency in the issuance of excise licenses to persons dealing with excisable goods or services, I have proposed an amendment to provide for issuance of licenses within 14 working days upon receipt of all required valid documents by the Commissioner. Mr. Speaker, the Finance Act 2023 introduced duty on imported eggs, potatoes, onions at the rate of 25%. To promote trade across East African region, I propose the removal of this excise duty on imported eggs, potatoes, and onions originating from East African Community Partner States, subject to goods meeting the East African Community Rules of Origin. Mr. Speaker, currently, excise duty is 15% on the following: telephone, internet data services, fees charged on money transfer services by banks, fees charged on money transfer by agencies and other financial services providers, and the fees charged on cellular phone service providers. I propose to retain the excise duty rate of 15% on fees charged on money transfer services by cellular phone service providers to benefit retail electronic payments ecosystem. Let me now move to amendments to Tax Procedures Act. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight those proposed amendments of the Tax Procedures Act. Currently, there is no validity period for the agency notices issued for enforcement of correction of unpaid taxes. This gap often leads to tax disputes and delayed revenue correction. To address this, I propose to amend the Tax Procedures Act to provide 1 year validity period for agency notices. Mr. Speaker, in order to align the timelines for claiming VAT and in the Tax Procedures Act and VAT Act, I propose to delete the reference on timeliness for claiming refunds at the VAT Act, so that the applicable timeline is the 6 months that is provided under the Tax Procedures Act. Mr. Speaker, currently registered manufacturers whose value of investments is in the preceding year, in the preceding 3 years is at least 3 million, are exempted from withholding tax. In order to promote equity and create fairness to all manufacturers, I propose to amend the Tax Procedures Act to remove this exemption. Mr. Speaker, I propose to amend the Tax Procedures Act to clarify that enforcement and correction of taxes will be undertaken where a decision of the tribunal or court is in favor of the Commissioner, and stay orders have not been obtained against the decision. Mr. Speaker, the 60 days provided to the Commissioner in the Tax Procedures Act to review documents submitted by the taxpayers in support of an objection of tax assessment by the Commissioner are not adequate. To ensure comprehensive review, and in order to give the Commissioner adequate time, I propose to extend the timelines to object decisions of the Commissioner from 60 days to 90 days. Let me now move to amendments to miscellaneous fees and levies. Mr. Speaker, last year, 17.5% export and investment promotion levy was introduced on imported goods that are also locally produced in adequate quantities. In the Finance Bill 2024, the list of goods has been expanded and the rate of the levy has been reduced to 3% for most of the goods and others 10%. Mr. Speaker, in order to facilitate the National Intelligence Service to carry out its mandate, I propose to amend the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act to exempt the National Intelligence Service from payments of import declaration fee and railway development levy on security equipment and motor vehicles imported or purchased locally for official use. Mr. Speaker, the high production and importation of hazardous goods, particularly electrical and electronic devices, into the country has led to significant increases in electronic waste. We call it e-waste in Kenya. This surge in waste production poses a considerable risk to both the environment and human health. In this regard, I propose to introduce eco-levy on various products to be payable in line with the polluter pays principle. Mr. Speaker, the levy will be imposed under the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act. Then me turn to the amendments to the Kenya Revenue Authority Act. Mr. Speaker, to enhance public knowledge and literacy on tax matters, I propose to amend the Kenya Revenue Act to enable Kenya School of Revenue Administration collaborate with other institutions of higher learning, develop curricula, assess, examine students, and award certificates in tax matters. I have submitted this amendment in a separate bill. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the government, under the leadership of His Excellency, the President, Honorable Dr. William Samoei Ruto, has succeeded in steering the economy through a very difficult period of global and domestic challenges. Remarkably, the economy has recovered from the lagged effects of COVID-19 pandemic and unwinding from persistent and successive domestic and external shocks that created some permanent effects. Mr. Speaker, the policies and structural reforms outlined in this budget have laid a firm foundation to protect the fragile recovery for a sustained socio-economic transformation. Financing development is critical to this economic transformation. That is why raising adequate revenues is a core pillar to this economic transformation and growth. I'm confident that these measures will create jobs. They will strengthen economic recovery, and they will reduce the cost of living in the country, thereby providing the much-needed relief to the common mwananchi. I therefore urge honorable members and all Kenyans to support the implementation of the measures contained in this budget for our mutual prosperity. Finally, Mr. Speaker, achieving prosperous Kenya requires leadership and support of every Kenyan. For this reason, I wish to thank His Excellency the President, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, and His Excellency the Deputy President, Honorable Rigathi Gachagua, for their continued wise guidance and leadership and even perseverance to long hours of working to get things right. My special appreciation goes to Prime Cabinet Secretary, the Attorney General, my fellow Cabinet Secretaries, and the respective Principal Secretaries and accounting officers and staff of all MDAs for their support and contribution to the financial year 2024-2025 budget making process and contributions to these budget proposals. My sincere appreciation also goes first to you, Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, and your counterpart in the Senate, the majority and minority leaders of the entire House leadership, including respective clerks, for overseeing the approval process of the budget estimates for the financial year 2024-2025 and related documents. Second, to honorable chairs, members of both Budget and Appropriation Committee and Finance and National Planning Committee, and all the other departmental committees of this House, as well as of the staff of the Parliamentary Budget Office, for their constructive input, excellent leadership during the approval process and the discussions that we have had in the process of these budget proposals. Third, let me thank my colleagues, the National Treasury and Economic Planning, led by Dr. Chris Kipto, the Principal Secretary, and the National Treasury, and James Mohati, the Principal Secretary of State Department of Economic Planning, for their commitment, dedication, and support in the preparation of this budget process, including their own leadership in their own MDAs. Fourth, I want to thank the management and staff of the Central Bank of Kenya, Kenya Revenue Authority, financial sector regulators, and other MDAs for their contributions and advice during this budget process. My gratitude also goes to the multilateral and bilateral development partners for their continued technical and financial support. And further, I thank the private sector for its sustained contribution to the discussions we have had to support the growth of our economy. Sixth, I wish to appreciate the media and non-state actors for their active engagement and even participation in the 2024-2025 budget process. Mr. Speaker, I remain immensely grateful to my family and their support and inspiration as I execute my duties at the National Treasury and Economic Planning, which is not an easy task, I can tell you. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, My utmost gratitude goes to all Kenyans for their contributions, proposals, and suggestions received during the finalization of the budget proposals. The outcome of these measures are to our own benefits and a reward to perseverance on the difficulties that we have gone through and to solve the difficulties ahead of us. Thank you, and may God bless you. Mr. Speaker, before I resume my seat, you recall that I have already submitted to this House the budget estimates and the Finance Bill 2024 together with the accompanying documents as required by the Public Finance Management Act 2012. Today, I further submit the following documents to this august House, and I request that you graciously receive them. First, the budget statements for the financial year 2024-25. Second, the 2024 budget policy statement. Third, estimates of revenue, grants, and loans for the financial year 2024-2025 budget. Fourth, financial statements for the financial year 2024-2025 budget. Fifth, medium-term debt management strategy 2024. Sixth, budget highlights, the Mwananchi Guide, the financial year 2024-2025 budget. And finally, statistical annex of the budget statements for the financial year 2024-2025. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to move.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, I'm waiting for the handing over of the documents. Thank you. You may take your seat. Honorable members, I wish to thank the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Economic Planning for ably making a public pronouncement of the budget highlights and revenue-raising measures for the national government for the year 2024-25 and the medium term. In this regard, honorable members, I wish to confirm that in conformity with the provisions of Article 2211 of the Constitution, Section 37, 39, and 39A of the Public Finance Management Act 2012, and Standing Order 244C, the Cabinet Secretary submitted to the National Assembly the documents and legislative proposals required to implement the national government budget for financial year 2024-25 on 30th April 2024. This is within the prescribed timeline. The documents submitted by the Cabinet Secretary included the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the national government and the Finance Bill 2024, which is currently under consideration by the House. Honorable members, it is now my pleasure to invite all honorable members, the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury, all Cabinet Secretaries present, and other invited guests to a reception at the Parliamentary Courtyard at the rise of the House. Honorable members, now being 5:17 p.m., this House stands adjourned until Tuesday, 18th June 2024 at 2:30 p.m.
The Treasury Cabinet Secretary, Professor Njuguna Ndung'u, has delivered his much-awaited speech, and the CS has focused his speech on four main points: the economic performance, fiscal policy direction, revenue measures, and expenditure plans, where the Cabinet Secretary has outlined how the government intends to allocate its resources across different sectors such as education, health, infrastructure, and security, among other sectors. This is a broadcast that was brought to you by the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit in conjunction with the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. My name is Edward Kabasa. That's where we wind up the broadcast of the Parliamentary Business on this 13th day of June 2024.
Straight from the smart farm to the bench. And as you know, many of you know, tomorrow is the reading of the budget, 4 trillion shilling budget. And we have a panel of guests here from across the board to talk about how it will affect them and you. From the far end, Dr. Barak with the 2 R's, Muluka, political analyst. Right next to him, Njugush is a content creator. Many of you know him on the various socials. Right next to him is Fanya Mambo. Yes, that's his real name, Fanya Mambo Kinodhia, also political analyst. And right next to me is a comedian turned activist, Eric Omondi, with a brand new 3-piece suit. Hey, boss.
My brother. Kuna mali mtu ameumia. Ukifanya hii suit.
Dr. Barak, let me start with you on the far end. Tomorrow's reading of the budget. How do you see it? Because every year it grows by another trillion, last year it was 3-point-something trillion. There's an outcry. Tomorrow is 4 trillion and change. How do you see it?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Jeff. Allow me to begin by appreciating the panel. As you can see, this time round I'm here with the young Turks. Turks, T-U-R-K-S, not tax, T-A-X. So I'm here with the young Turks. And as an elder, you can see I have begun my succession. They're the ones who are going to take over the baton.
Yes.
And as they take over the baton, and we are talking about taxation, we must start asking ourselves what the impact on the younger generations is going to be, because over the years, over the decades, it has always been an upward trend. Sometime in the past, the media would come up the following day and tell us that this was the poor man's tax or the poor man's budget. And they would look at various items here and there, and they would say, oh, the ordinary mwananchi has been favored by the budget. Then, of course, a few days later, they would set in mini budgets, and they would start going into those spaces that had apparently been spared. This time round, we have gotten into that place where the powers that be have thrown all pretext through the window. It is basically skinning you alive. The debate has been on for about a month now, and therefore we don't expect that there's going to be anything new. There are not going to be any surprises. We know about the on-raging debate about the finance bill, which is supposed to bedrock the budget. And so the budget has already, in point of fact, been in the public space. And as it is read, it is basically going through the motions of the same things that we have been hearing. Prices of virtually everything being hiked, new and higher taxes being imposed, and all of them eventually finding in a manner of speaking, if I could use an oxymoron, a safe space in the finance bill. And you are aware, of course, that in the past, State House did say they were watching to see whether there would be any member of parliament who would be opposed. Of course, tomorrow is not the day when they are going to pass it. The process moves to the next stage, but it's behind that kind of history and background, and where parliament itself is hostage to the executive.
Absolutely. Jugush, how is it going to affect you as a content creator?
First things first, I think as a young person, I think we have a lot to worry about because we are not inspired. There's no hope that inspires the young people when you look at what's happening. To start with, the people you thought you elected to go and represent you are not doing what they're supposed to do. Like the other day, I was quite ashamed to hear 2 or 3 parliamentarians saying they have not read the finance bill. And one said, why would you make noise of something that maybe haikuhusu? That's the exact word she used. And those are the people we are expecting to represent us. Those are the people we voted for to represent us. So that aside, and as everything now is going through parliament from the finance bill, now the budget's going to go through there, we don't have hope because we keep adding on to the debts we have. Yes, we are paying, there are those that are due, we keep paying, but of course we add more to whatever already we have. Last year I think we did 3.7 trillion. That's the budget. I think that's what you are. Now we're talking about 4 trillion. It will keep. So by the time I'm of age to be able to know A to Z, I think we'll be having a lot of baggage. Remember what we are experiencing. I think it's from now the other government where we overborrowed, and now we have to borrow again so that we pay. And we are saying in every 100 bob we collect, around 7% goes to pay debts, and what is remaining is what now is used to pay someone, is used for development. And already for the 20-something percent, we are not having it. We don't have the best health, we don't have the best education. As a young person, I think that worries me, that tomorrow I won't be able to afford education for my kid. Right now is when we are taking care of our parents. So what happens when they need help and I cannot afford it? Yeah, that's why we have a lot of WhatsApp groups. So when to come to content creation, the budget affects me in what is, because again, we go back to taxation because that's what informs how they are going to make this budget. They are saying they are going to tax ABCD in terms of content creation. All right? So my worry is, will I see money put in, budgeted, to be able to facilitate my production, to be able, or is just taxing and taxing? Because once and the reason I'm saying this, as a content creator, we are hidden in youth empowerment, at times in sports and culture. Culture is very wide. So in terms of content creation, and that's where a lot of youths, again, we've been let down. We go to school, there are no jobs. So what do we do?
Okay, speaking of being let down, Fanya Mambo, we're supposed to have an opposition in this country. Yes. It doesn't seem to exist. Yes. Or the little opposition that was there is now, they've been compromised, for lack of a better word.
I wouldn't want to say that. You see, those are symptoms of what the actual problem is. And the problem we have is not the budget. The problem we have is not the tax bill. The problem we have is the administration that is in power today. because they seem to have this inexhaustible depths of how far they can go to finish Mwananchi. They have ideas that I have never seen. People who wake up and decide to tax bread, people who wake up, they just have a very deep reservoir of horrible ideas on how to make the lives of Kenyans really difficult and impossible. And every time they wake up, they have a calculation on something horrible, something horrid, something that has come from a horror movie in terms of how to make our lives miserable. So when you're done discussing the budget, you will start discussing another horror movie episode that they are going to come up with. Because every single day,